Hello and welcome. I'm Allison Tan. I'm the Program and Operations Manager for Undergraduate Research Opportunities, and you are joining us today for a day in the life of an undergraduate researcher. And we actually have several researchers here. We have Carol Ann Espy, Kevin Tao, Matthias Pretes,
Yeah.
who they are all here to tell you what a typical day in the life of undergraduate research looks like. We also have Jessica Eskew. Jessica is, if you can come on over as a presenter, I believe you are now. She's joining us as well to present. Basically, I'm going to ask each of our ambassadors and Pura students to tell us who they are, introduce themselves, what they're researching, and then give us 3 items that a typical day looks like as an undergraduate researcher. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Carol Ann because she's, Carol Ann, and she's also the president of Undergraduate Research Ambassadors. So Carol Ann, introduce yourself and give us some more information.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Carol Ann. As Allison mentioned, I am the president of Undergraduate Research Ambassadors, which we're a group of students on campus who help students find research opportunities and then support them when they're in those roles. So I am a fourth year biochemistry major, and I started my research my spring of my freshman year. The research that I do is in structural biology, so I do a lot of work with proteins and figuring out the structure. In my lab, we use electron microscopy, so I've been working with microscopes, taking pictures, and then analyzing the images that we get out. So I do a lot of more analytical side of work, and I know you'll hear from some of the students later that they do a more wet lab side of the work. But a typical day for me, I come in before classes and run a test. So the way my research works is I'm trying to create a 3D model of the protein that we're working with. And so I start at the beginning of the day with starting that test off and then come back periodically through the day to check on it. And then I also have some more like wet lab things that I do, but that's a typical day for me.
Okay, Kevin, can you go next? Kevin?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. Are we good? Okay, perfect. Well, my name is Kevin Tao. I'm a fourth year BME major. And I'm also in the same club as Carol Ann. I am the vice president of outreach. So I maintain a big database for all the opportunities to students for research right now. So my research is in immunoengineering. So I do a lot with basically enhancing people's immune systems. I work in Dr. Kwong's lab in the BME department, and some things I do on a daily basis, I would say, so as Carol Ann said, I'm a person who's really in the wet labs. Usually I always spend at least 5 hours a day in lab running experiments. I also usually spend, I think in the beginning of the day, I'll go over my experiment that I want to do. Throughout, and usually there's a lot of wait times. So I'll spend some time waiting and then sometimes doing stuff. And then at the end of the day, I usually collect all the data, I process it, and then I start reading to make sure it makes sense. And if not, then I start planning for the next day.
Okay, Jessica, we finally have Jessica back. Jessica, a little bit about yourself and about 3 things that are a typical day for you in the research lab.
Okay, great. So I'm a fourth year. I guess I'll be a 5th year this next semester. And I am a physics major with an astrophysics concentration. So for the past year, I've been doing research through LIGO, so the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, under Dr. Laura Catanati. And I've ranged in a couple different type of topics with research, but right now I've been focusing on doing waveform reconstruction. So a typical day for that will look like me, and I do everything remotely, which is kind of great. So I'll be working on code that we run that is basically taking the data that we get from the interferometers at Livingston and where's the other one? Hanford, and then also in Cassini, Italy, and then putting it in making reconstructions using different type of programs that we have. And that usually takes a couple days to run through. So what I will do then is usually work with the collaborators that we all have in this project. So that can be at Georgia Tech. There's about 2 graduate students that I work with, and then there's a bunch of people outside of Georgia Tech. So a lot of reading emails, a lot of being on Zoom calls, and a lot of reading comments and all other updates that we have using the different programs that we use. And so this summer, I'm actually doing a different type of research through Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, which is not astrophysics related, and it's on the plasma material interactions in tokamak fusion devices. So my day for that, since I'm not able to go to Princeton, New Jersey during this time, I'm doing remotely. So I'll basically be in contact through email with my principal investigator and the graduate student and postdoc I work with, and just using coding. And so I'll run a code doing simulations on the ion angle distribution for different materials, and just running a bunch of simulations is usually how it goes in coding. And I think that is probably most of what I would do.
Okay, Matthias?
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthias. I'm actually a second year in biomedical engineering. I work for the EPIC Research Lab in the mechanical engineering school, actually, so I don't do biomedical research. I work under Dr. Aaron Young, and what we're doing is we're creating assistance strategies for an exoskeleton for different walking modes. So when you walk uphill, you have different muscles that are used in the walking and the gait. So you want to create a model. We create a model that applies different torques and gives you different assistances for each type of walking. So running, walking, fast walking, and uphill and downhill. A basic day for me, I guess I'll go with last semester because that's before COVID. We would, every afternoon, I would meet in the lab for, honestly, it was about 2 hours with my research partner. So I actually got to have a partner in the lab, and we would work on both a little bit of the hands-on stuff and the coding stuff. Sometimes we actually have experiments that we have to organize and run. And other times we'll be working on our model and using a lot of MATLAB to create our different simulation methods.
Matthias has a great, he's a former Ignite student, so students just like you who started last summer. What advice would you give students who are starting in Ignite who want to find research? I know we're doing a lot of things remote, but Matthias, what was one thing that helped you the most in finding your research opportunity and then quickly going to become a President's Undergraduate Research Award recipient? Because you were only started last summer, and he already has a Pura Award for this. Is this summer?
This summer, correct.
This summer, and that's 1 year's time. I think that's something really great. So can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. I think the main advice.
And can you tell what Pura is?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I think, first of all, the main advice I have is listen to advice. You can always, there's a lot of information out there, especially like this. I actually found out of where I wanted to go in a meeting just like this, actually, in person, obviously on campus. But so there's many lectures and everything that you can definitely find your way and find exactly, oh, this is the way I should contact the professor. This is what I should do. In my case, I had a friend that he told me about VIP, which is a vertically integrated project. So it's a research team you're able to join as a class, and you it counts just as a class, regular stuff, and your PhD, your mentor for research is gonna end up like your professor during the semester. So that's what I was told about, and I ended up applying for it, and I ended up joining the research team. This happened on last spring of 2020, and I started fall actually because I started contacting my professor a little earlier. So my biggest advice also is try to have a good email relationship with any possible professors, anyone you can contact. Try to send out an email. It never hurts to ask. Usually professors are actually really happy when you ask them about their research because it's something they're passionate about. So they want to talk to you about it. So if you find any lab, and I mean like really any lab that interests you, what they do, my advice is contact them and see. Sometimes they'll reply, sometimes they won't. They're usually busy, so you have to wait a little bit sometimes and be a little insistent. And then onto the Pura Award is the President's Undergraduate Award. It's a salary award that you apply before the semester you want to receive it at, and basically is just like you write a little summary of what your research is, what you want to do, and why you want the grant, and they allow you a salary award for the semester you want to research at, and you have to obviously, and then after the semester you send out a report of all the accomplishments you've made during research.
Are certain research projects restricted to international students?
I
Yeah,
can
okay.
take this if no one else wants to because I'm an international student. So I'm actually from Brazil, and so far I haven't had an experience where it was actually restricted, especially because it's at Georgia Tech, so they're actually really helpful with giving you the opportunity. I believe if maybe it's find something government related, it might be a little harder. There might be some restriction there, but not from my end. I've never experienced that.
Yeah, and that's the exact answer we give students. If there is federal funding involved or Department of Defense funding, yes, there are going to be restrictions to international students for that, and that's just because of the funding purposes. It's not to ignore students or not allow those students. There's just restrictions involved. But we try to find opportunities for every student. So how many hours do you spend in the lab, say, on an average day?
I can answer this one first.
Sure.
So typically I would spend 2 to 3 hours in lab a day. That being said, I spend around that much time because I am supposed to be working 12 hours a week in the lab. Another opportunity, which I saw was another question, another opportunity to be paid to do research is the Petite Scholars Program, which is within it includes like BME, biology, biochemistry labs. So it's a specific area at Tech, and if you are involved in those labs or you can apply to work in those labs, it gives you a year funding to work in those labs. So that's the program I'm currently in. And through that, I'm supposed to work 12 hours a semester, 12 hours a week in the spring and fall semesters. And then this summer, I'm working full time in my lab. Granted, that's online, but so I typically spend 2 to 3 hours during a typical semester.
So the amount of time I spend per day, and back when before coronavirus caused me to work from home, I would go into my lab in Boggs and be anywhere from an hour to I would spend sometimes almost like 10 hours. But my time was determined by how much I worked per week. And so that would be around like 20, 25 hours. This summer, I'm supposed to spend 40 hours a week, so that's 8 hours a day. And I think that my research can be really flexible with the time you spend as long as you get your stuff done. So if you finish early, it's like no problem. Then you can do other things. But when I was getting paid using the time clock after coronavirus, then we had to log in exactly our time and made sure that we were accounting for things that we were doing. So if I maybe finished what I was working on, like the plots that I was making, then I would spend extra time reading or something like that to make sure I worked all the hours per week that I was supposed to.
I told you guys earlier, so I work in a wet lab, and usually in a wet lab, sometimes your experiments will vary a lot in terms of time. If I were to say like an average per day, I'd say like 4 to 6 hours. But a lot of times that might be a little too much, honestly, when you're starting out. Recently, I think when you have a little more autonomy in the lab, you usually might work more. But my times are usually split to like maybe one day I work like 10 hours, and then the next day I work like 2. And then sometimes I usually come in on the weekends for that.
Okay, one of the questions we have is how will labs work in an online environment? Because, we've all gone to an online environment, and, that did change, as Kevin said, he's a wet lab, so it did radically change the work he was doing. And I will let you know, as transparency, we are working diligently, Georgia Tech is, to get students back on campus and back in the labs, especially undergraduate students, doing research, and we hope to be at 75% when fall starts. But it will look different. So can you each kind of ping as to how that works with an online setting, kind of what you do now compared to what you used to do?
So I have an interest. Oh, and I also wanted to say something about getting paid for research quickly before this next question on what it's going to look like. But for getting funded for research, I've been paid to do my research since I was a sophomore. When I was at Georgia State, I received funding through NCR, actually, from an NCR scholarship. And then here at Tech, I've received funding from NSF grants that my research principal investigator has been awarded. And I've also received course credit. So they'll do a semester for getting paid and a semester of course credit, which is pretty great. But I also applied for the Pure Award for in the fall. And my research didn't really change that much when coronavirus happened, since a lot of what I do is hard for me to just do virtually anyway, because I work with a really big collaboration, which is worldwide. So where I would go into the lab to work, now I'm just doing it at home and doing Zoom calls to make sure I'm still communicating with my group. But I want to go back to the lab because I liked having that collaborative environment. It's really helpful to be able to ask somebody a question, like whenever it comes to your mind.
Anyone else want to ping in on that? If not, we've got, what was your first research project at Georgia Tech?
So I can go quickly. I actually started doing research in the high energy physics lab under Dr. Ote, and it was to build a detector design a detector to be used in some telescopes in New Mexico. And as I started doing it, which I thought I would like because I had background building muon detectors when I was at Georgia State University before I transferred. As I started getting into it, I realized I didn't like it at all. And I changed and didn't do any research for about a month or two, and then I was able to get in contact with Laura Catanati and start working on LIGO. So you might start doing research and end up you didn't like it, but you can always change. So don't get discouraged right away.
That's a really great point. Not all sizes, not all research is going to fit the same. When or what college year did you start seriously looking for research opportunities? And, I'm curious, when did y'all start looking for that? Mateus, I'll let you start, and then I want Carol Ann and Kevin to ping in on that as well.
Okay, yeah. She already kind of mentioned that since I'm a sophomore, I had to do it my freshman year, right? That's my advice. Like, do it as soon as you can. You might not even get in a lab. Like, I tried my first semester, honestly, and I got no response. I tried emailing some professors, but it was a little difficult. But eventually you'll get there. So I would say start as early as you can so you can get the experience, not only because you want that research experience to have, but also I think it changes your mentality in a classroom setting when you're doing research and you're seeing how it applies to the stuff you're learning. Like when you're in classroom, you're like, oh, I can just look this up and I'll have the answer. But when you're actually in research, you don't have that. Like you have to actually rely on your peers and rely on like your supervisors and everything and actually like understand what you're doing rather than looking something up. So I advise you try to get into it as soon as you're able to. I understand it's not as easy for some people as like their first semester. Sometimes it's a little hard to adjust, but at least have it like in the background there, thinking about it, you know?
Yeah, so I can add to this. I started looking for research opportunities my first semester at Tech as a freshman. I as actually came in with an award from the College of Sciences called Early Research Award, which essentially is encouraging students to get involved in research in the earlier semesters. And honestly, I don't know if I would have gotten involved in research without this push. But I started reaching out my first semester, freshman year, assuming that I would be told to come back when I had more class experience um, to bring to the table. But I actually got responses from some professors and got connected to other people and was able to like look at some projects. And so I got involved the spring of my first year at Tech in research.
For me, I actually started looking for my research lab actually before I came to Tech. So I actually started looking in this summer because I was one of the reasons I really wanted to come to Tech was because I thought the research in the BME department was really cool. And what really helped me was I actually reached out who actually was also an undergraduate research ambassador kind of at the time. And he helped me like find the lab that I really wanted to join. So I actually started like my first day of Tech, and I've been in the same research lab ever since. And I can definitely say that's probably my favorite part of Tech. All these 3 years was definitely growing in that community.
Yes, and I think I know who that individual was. And yes, he was a research ambassador and was fantastic and has since graduated and is going on to med school. So we got a great question that just popped in. What scared you the most about pursuing research opportunities, and how did you overcome your fear? I think when we think about it, students are really not sure. Sometimes faculty scare students. I know that sometimes they scare me. So, I mean, what were you afraid of? I think Carol Ann really hit it on the head when she said, one of her fears.
Yeah, so I would say one of my fears was just being told no, being told that I didn't have enough experience. But something that we like to say in URA, which is Undergraduate Research Ambassadors, is that it's never too late and it's never too early to start doing research. As long as you show that you're willing to learn and that you have the drive and work ethic, a lot of professors will take students on, even if they don't necessarily have the skills that they wanted in the first place. So I would say that that's one of the biggest fears, of just being told, no, you don't have the experience required. But it's better to reach out and get that no than to just sit around and kind of wait till you think that you're ready. And my thought process was, oh, if I reach out now and they tell me no, at least they'll in the back of their mind be like, oh, this girl reached out first. She took the initiative. So then if I reach out later, once I have that experience, maybe I'll be put kind of like higher on a list to be brought into the lab.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer. And I can speak because before research ambassadors existed, students would come and talk to me. And I'm not a researcher at Georgia Tech. I'm done with school. I have no desire to go back. So it was really hard for me to say, what would scare a student the most. But I can tell you, Carol Ann said it best, don't be afraid to get a no. Go ahead and put yourself out there. I had a 5th-year senior, his graduating semester, show up in my office and during phase 2 registration, so the first week of spring classes for his graduating semester, and say, I'm finally ready to do research. This is Thursday before registration closes. I need you to help me find something. And I can tell you, he waited too long because, he was ready well before them. He just wasn't sure of himself. So you want to go ahead and jump on in as soon as you can. A no is not a no, never. A no is maybe not yet, but let's talk again. How do you craft your emails when asking professors for research? And I know all of you had to probably do this at some point when you were reaching out. So I'm going to let Mateus take that one, and then we're going to go to Kevin, who is the VP of Outreach, and he can do my shameless plug for Ambassador Summer office hours. So, Mateus, how did you craft your email?
Yeah. So I think the first thing you have to do is, well, find a lab that you're interested in. And once you find that, the email is really gonna kind of come to you, honestly, because you'll see, oh, like this is the work he does. So now what you do next is, okay, you read his research, you read his work, and when you're writing his email, you tell him, you're like, oh, Doctor, da I really like your work. I especially like this stuff. So just tell him like you're how interested you are in his research. Tell him like what you like, what you would like to learn about it. And honestly, sometimes you don't even have to ask for a lab opening. You can just ask them, "Oh, do you think there's any time we can you can talk about it?" And usually they're actually like, yeah, usually they're actually really interested in telling you more about their research. I think that happens a lot, honestly. Even with undergraduate students, if you ask them about, "Oh, what are you doing?" Like, we'll go on for like at least like a couple of minutes just telling you, oh, this is what we do, because everyone that works in research is usually really interested in it. So my advice is when you type your email, ask them questions. That's it. That's the main thing I would say.
I totally agree with Matthias and everything he says. I think it's so important to like really understand what your professor that you're looking at has done in the past, and that's a big talking point when you send an email. The other thing I think you should probably make sure that everyone knows is that when you first send an email to a professor, you want to make sure it's pretty professional. Also remember like these, you're not like buddy them. So keep that professionality in there. I'd also probably note that you probably want to say something like why this project is important to you and what like personal account you have to it. Of course, there's a lot of different things that go into an email, and there's different like way, and it can also depend on like where you want to do research and stuff. And the shameless plug is, so we have virtual office hours for URA, and this is something we can help everyone with, and we can like go over an email with you and what you've put into it. And well, as she said, we have all the virtual hours, virtual office hours right now, and they're like every day from like I think it's like 12 to 2 or something.
So another question that came up is how do you find out what professors are researching? Is there a website?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One way that I always suggest for students to first find out like what kind of research is going on at Tech is under every major website, there's a research tab. And under that tab, they have, depending on the school, they'll divide it differently, but it'll have the research that's going on at Tech. And then from that, you can find out what professors are doing that research. So I always suggest to students to start there and kind of look through that and see what kind of interests them the most, because that's a really good way to start figuring out what area or what field of research that you would like to go into. Another way is that another shameless plug for URA office hours is that every fall we come together and we email professors across campus and we ask them if they are actively looking for undergraduate research students to come in, or researchers to come into their lab. And from those responses, we create a database that we allow students to choose 3 opportunities from every time they come to office hours. So that's another good opportunity to kind of see what's going on campus.
Okay, how do you go about learning new skills?
I guess it's something quickly about, especially like wet lab stuff. Or at least in my field, a lot of the times, if you don't have the skills that like some labs are looking for, you usually can get like something similar in your beginner classes, like your first chem lab or your first bio lab. You'll learn about these techniques. And one of the things that I actually really appreciate about a lot of like Georgia Tech professors is like, even though you might not know exactly how to do it, they're always willing to teach you. So I've definitely heard of a lot of like professors who like, as long as you're eager to learn, they're very happy, and along with their grad students, to teach you more of the specific of what they're doing. I think though it is something to worry about, it's not like the defining reason you might get something or not.
So for coding, I first took a CS class in Java, and I will be honest, I've never used Java ever in my research, but taking that class gave me some like ground ground level skills to be able to, when I first started having to use coding, which was in C++, I was able to kind of quickly understand what was going on. And then I started having to use Python. My first project with LIGO was on a machine learning project. So I was taking like scripts to characterize like glitches in the detectors, and I knew nothing about it. And I was using there's a lot of online resources that you can use to practice coding, but I think the best way to practice and to learn gaining skills is to like just dive in and try to, figure it out as you're going. And Google is really great too, but I think that the way that I was able to gain those skills was really just trying it out and seeing what I was not good at or maybe good at. But I've also done some courses that are offered like through the PACE, like supercomputing cluster, because now I do a lot of work having to do that. So they'll have these online sessions that you can do, and you can also then, through your research, sign up for classes on campus in Python, machine learning stuff. And so those are really great when you don't get the whole course, experience for this type of language.
The library also offers Python classes. So you can take classes on Python through the library. There's also Linda at godtech.edu that has classes on a lot of that. So you can certainly start learning it. Couple of other questions, and then Carol Ann just put in that do you have to participate in research related to your major? No, you don't. We really support interdisciplinary research, and that's basically researchers coming together to work on a common project, from computer scientists to mechanical engineering to business majors. Does anyone want to field what they really want to define as interdisciplinary research?
Well, I could say that if it's related to your interests, I would say. So I guess the research I'm doing this summer through Princeton is I had to, in order to get course credit or just the audit of it, so it'll show up on my transcript this summer, but it doesn't count towards any of my credit hours to graduate or anything. And I'm not getting paid by Georgia Tech or anything. I'm getting paid by the Department of Energy. But I had to contact somebody in the nuclear engineering field that could, or department at Tech, that could be my mentor during this time. And so that's not in my department, but I knew who that person was because I took a class in nuclear engineering. And that was all I had to do to take that class, was just reach out to my academic advisor and tell him I was interested in it and that it was part of my physics major goals and dreams. So it doesn't have to be in your department. And I mean, I went from astrophysics to nuclear physics.
Yeah. Very different. So I don't think we have any neuroscience researchers on the call today, but I can tell you we do have neuroscience undergraduate research ambassadors. They're not currently participating this summer. They are home relaxing, but they will be back on campus. Specifically, I can tell you with neuroscience research, it combines biology, it combines psychology. There's students that are doing it over at Emory. Our previous president did all her research in neuroscience and has now been accepted to Emory for graduate school. And she did her research with MRI and computational MRI reporting. So we have it. You just have to kind of search it out. We had a great question that appeared in the chat. Is what surprised you the most about your undergraduate research projects?
I guess the thing that surprised me the most was how much I had to code, actually. That's kind of like all I do now. It's really just like coding or being on the computer. And I thought at first, like when I first started doing this, I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. I'm not a coder. I'm a physicist. I'm a researcher. And then I realized how much you can get out of that and how much you can create and how you can be kind of like artistic with your coding. And I realized that I actually really did like it, and I did enjoy using a different type of way to get my research done other than just in a lab. But I do still love doing experimental work and like building things. And it kind of showed me, I guess, too, how much I miss doing that. But I guess I was excited to learn more about, the things that I thought I didn't like that I actually did like.
Great question that just came up. Mateus, did you want to pop in an answer for that?
I was gonna add on to what Jessica said, also actually about coding. Um, yeah, I was actually also surprised about that. I do all my work on MATLAB right now, and like when you take the class, it's one thing, and when you actually apply to research, you're like, oh, so that's why this is, So I just think like that was like honestly the my favorite thing when I started it, because I was also kind of in the same boat. I was like, oh, like it's coding, like I want to do like actual like biomechanics stuff, and then you go into it and you're like, oh, so this is why I learned MATLAB, like this is what you're actually doing with it. So I think coding is definitely like a good aspect that people overlook sometimes.
A really great thing is I know that we have all scientists and engineering students on the call, but one thing that came up in the chat is, are there non-STEM research projects for undergraduate students?
Absolutely. So it seems surprising, Georgia Tech's known for its STEM program, but there are research opportunities in other majors. So like I know the LMC, so learning the LMC and Ivan Allen College, like all of them, they do have research opportunities for their students. I know people who have worked with professors, even just like editing books and fact checking those books and doing research with that. I know people who have done kind of on the interdisciplinary research side, like she did the more literary side of it, but helped a professor who was doing work on AI and did research more so on the morality of it. And so she brought that portion of the research to something that you typically would not assume would touch the LMC side.
And yeah, I mean, we have a lot of non-STEM research. We have, like Carol Ann said, Ivan Allen, College of Business and College of Design also have undergraduate research going on. In fact, we've seen a large increase in those students. For one of the questions that was put together is, I know that Mateus mentioned President's Undergraduate Research Awards, but that is a stipend salary award that allows students to be paid to do their research during a semester. And it's a $1,500 stipend. But we had 195 students apply for that for the upcoming fall semester. That is a record number, and a lot of those were non-STEM. I had 10 students from Ivan Allen apply. We had at least 12 students apply for College of Design. We had 2 from the College of Business. So it's going on. It's something that you're not thinking about possibly. I can speak from experience. My degrees are in non-STEM related, and I did research in history and criminology that wouldn't be normally thought of. So it is absolutely out there, and our research ambassadors also have it. Is it possible or probable for a computer engineering major to be able to participate in physics research?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I am the only physics major undergraduate working online. The other ones are computer science majors. So yes, that is definitely a possibility, because a lot of it is to deal with coding, and you really, if you know your stuff really well and you're able, and if you're interested in physics, it just is kind of like a win-win there. And I also wanted to mention something about like non-science related research, and a big part of why we can get funding through NSF for LIGO is our outreach that we do too. So stuff that I participate in my research doesn't necessarily focus on, the analysis that I do of data from the detector. I also do things like Skype a Scientist, where I talk with high school classes that are interested in the type of research I do. So I tell them what kind of stuff I do, kind of like this. and also like with outreach to younger K through 12 schools, so not just high school, but elementary school, and doing demos, physics demos, and working with the Society of Women in Physics and physics students, so the student organizations at Tech. But yeah, the VIP projects that's I think how we get a lot of our CS majors to work on our project. There's not one anymore for LIGO, but I think there's other opportunities as well.
So in the chat, I've been asked a quick question, and while we do that, we have a question. As I was trying to sign up for a URA virtual meeting and confused of who to choose. Any of our ambassadors can talk about any possible topic. Just because that's not their area of expertise does not mean that they don't know what they're talking about. I'm also on that list, and I meet with students on a regular basis because I also teach. So select an ambassador of your choice with a time that fits best for you. That would be the best way. One of the things that was coming up is for me to talk a little bit more about the PURA, or the President's Undergraduate Research Award application process. It's an extensive process for students. Jessica, Mateus, Carol Ann, and Kevin all know that it starts early. For the fall, we started taking applications at the 1st of May. We just closed that up, and we're finishing up group review right now. So through May, to the end of May, students applied. June was the review process. We're still doing review. There were so many, we have to narrow it down further. So there's a group review going on, and then hopefully we'll announce in the next couple of weeks. But it is an extensive process. The deadlines are always posted on the UROP website, but it takes about 2 to 3 months to begin from application to final decision time. And for any student who wants to get involved with undergraduate research, you have to have a faculty mentor or a research scientist or what we call a PI, primary investigator support. As an undergraduate student, you can't just go off on your own. You could, but we highly recommend that you have a faculty member support, especially if you want funding dollars.
What is the average amount of the PURA awards?
Sure. So it really roughly depends on the number of applications. We usually give between 200 to 300 per academic year. We count the academic year as fall, spring, summer. This academic year has changed a little bit because of COVID-19. So Mateus was in the group of students who were awarded for spring. We have a couple of students that have deferred that because they cannot do research unless they're on campus or in the physical lab. But we normally do 70 to 80 during the fall and the spring, and around between 40 to 50 in the summer. And that's about how it falls. We're looking at hopefully having at least 85 for this upcoming fall because we do know that COVID-19 is going to affect everything. And that's one question I want to pose to the group before we wrap up is, you've both been on campus and you've both been remote. What's one thing that COVID-19 did to affect your research, and how fast did you have to revamp your process?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I was lucky, kind of like Jessica said earlier, when you do a lot of coding or online work, or it's very lucky that you can take your work home with you. So I was lucky in that fact. So it didn't take too much change in my lab specifically, although I am missing out on a large portion of the wet lab techniques that I was going to do this summer. But from that aspect, it didn't take too much to change. One thing that did change, and I think this changed kind of in a positive way, is that my lab, which previously had lab meetings every 2 weeks because we are a smaller lab, so we don't meet as often, we are now meeting every week, and we now do a lot more presentations. So essentially we have like a journal club now where one person will choose a paper to present a week. And so it's been a very good experience because previously I hadn't presented papers in that manner, and so now I'm able to do that with my lab.
That's awesome. I think that that's a big point of what coronavirus has kind of shown us is how, or it's kind of brought us together. I know that my group, it was hard for us to kind of all sit down for an hour and do our group meetings because there was so much going on. And before classes were made virtual, there was the APS April meeting, which is the American Physical Society. And so the LIGO collaboration was going to submit or make public all of our data from this past observing run. And we actually closed our observing run early, and that was a big woo. But having that APS meeting made virtually, we were able to then push our deadlines back. So it kind of gave us more time to breathe. And then once we were able to breathe, we were able to get to know each other better and talk about things other than just research. So I got closer with my group, and I used a lot of communication platforms like Discord and Mattermost or Slack, and I was able to get in contact with people in my lab, not just trying to find them in their offices, but we were there's a more virtual communication, which at first I was not sure if that would work, but it's been really great, and I feel like I've gotten closer with people. But it was kind of hard to adapt to that right away, but after a couple weeks, it kind of got better. It was good.
Kevin, what about you? Because you work in a more wet lab environment than some of these other students. How did COVID-19 impact you?
So my whole life was kind of turned around really fast because I had planned so many experiments that were for the wet lab. But it did open a really interesting possibility because my old project was shifted to actually work for COVID and stuff. So all of my research that I had done in the past is currently trying to be applied to COVID. So even though I'm not in the lab, I do spend all the time during my days helping planning experiments and doing data analysis for the grad students and postdocs who can go in. And it's also pushed me in a really interesting way where I have to learn more code and have to develop more skills in computer science. So it's been a very, very interesting kind of turn in my life, but I'm pretty grateful for it, even though sometimes it is not the most ideal.
Matthias, I kind of want to turn this question to you because you, of course, applied for our President's Undergraduate Research Award for the summer. And we actually had that deadline. That deadline opened in February, and we weren't expecting COVID-19 to happen, and then it did. So how did you look at that as adapting what you put in a proposal and found out you were being awarded it, and knowing that you might not necessarily be going back to campus?
Yeah, so our research was already, a large part of it was through MATLAB. It was all coding wise, which pretty good. So that it wasn't harmed that much, but we also had to work around a couple of things because we were just finishing up our controller and we were getting into the data collection section of it. So we were gonna run experiments and then do analysis on it. But thankfully, because of optimizations and MATLAB, we're able to do a simulation study now, and we're doing it all instead of an experimental study, we're running it through a simulation study. So we changed up a little bit the idea, but we're using previously collected data, and then we're going to adapt around that area. So instead of collecting data in the lab, which is actually starting to reopen, but again, like Kevin mentioned, it's mainly for graduate students and PhDs. But yeah, so we're using previously collected data, and we're going to work around simulating it.
Okay, and one thing that DeMorris, yes, the wizard in the back room, who's been helping us to monitor this. One thing, and all of these students have received PURA or have applied for PURA, and we're going back to this because one of the main things is several of you are asking, can you get paid for your research? When a person puts together an application, they don't have to have a financial stipulation on how they're going to spend the money, because ultimately it's a salary for the student. Each student for the salary award gets $1,500, and they get paid a biweekly check. And then whatever they choose to do with that check, whether it's spend it on a vacation and spring break, which, you know, we probably won't do spring break again for the foreseeable future, or if they take that money and then put it back into lab equipment of their own purchase, it's up to them. But every student gets $1,500, and we highly recommend that students use all of that money. That's why for spring, some students actually, when COVID-19 happened and they could no longer go into the lab, we allowed them to defer the award, hopefully until the fall, to allow them to go back into the lab, because we do know that research in most cases at Georgia Tech is in person. Can you add, can you have any additional funding if you receive PURA? And this is going to be our last question because we're getting close to the end. If you receive a President's Undergraduate Research Award, the only time you're allowed to have any additional funding is during the summer. And the reason for that is the $1,500 goes very quick for students in the summer, especially when they're given the chance to do 40 hours a week, because they're not taking classes. So it's the only during the summer when you're allowed to have additional funding. You cannot have any other grants, stipends, or awards during the fall and the spring if you receive a PURA award. So that's the drawback of doing it then. But we do allow students to utilize 2 or more awards because of the summer capacity. In the summer, you're not taking a 15 or 12-hour course load like you would during the fall and the spring.
Because I was interested about, and I've had people ask about how you get like federal work study, or if you get other things, and if you are able to apply that to also your research, or if you have to do something else like a TA position in order to get that work study and the PURA, because people need that.
Absolutely. And so, you know, there's been some going back and forth on whether or not students are allowed to have federal work study and still receive PURA. And that's something that we're trying to get a definitive answer on. Because it's federal funding and the PURA is private funding, they kind of frown upon it, but I have seen it occur. So it is something that we are working with the federal work study people to discuss further as to if that is even a possibility. I actually had a federal work study student before I was finally told no who did that. So, you know, it's not written anywhere. So, but yeah, it's a rare occurrence. But I've seen it happen. So thanks for the question, and we can certainly discuss it further offline if you have more details you want to get into.
Okay.
But with that, yeah, no, I'm happy to discuss that offline. But with that said, we are right at time. I want to thank Jessica, Kevin, Carol, Ann, and Mateus for being here, taking time out of their schedule to provide you some answers. And thank you to Morris for providing some moderation. We really do appreciate it. This will be published via the Ignite program, so this is recorded and you can see it later. Thank you so much. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to me directly, Allison Tant, and I can be found on the UROP webpage. Thank you so much and have a great evening.